Argentina was once one of the richest countries in the world, but over the last half-century, it has been hit by a major economic crisis roughly once every decade.
President Trump has announced a $20 billion deal to rescue Argentina, angering some America First supporters and U.S. farmers.
Argentina didn't pay anything from the $45 billion, was the largest loan on IMF history. In 2018, we didn't pay any dollar from that, but the IMF gave Argentina this year another 20 billion, and US Treasury also gave another 20 billion. So we are talking about so far $85 billion. Argentina nowadays responds for over 35% of the IMF funds.
The government typically has spent in every single year in the last 60, except for a few short periods, more than the tax revenues it collected.
By some measures, President Milei has pulled off a near economic miracle, bringing Argentina's inflation rate down from almost 300% year over year in 2024 to just over 30% today.
With all this loan and this tremendous support by the US, now the inflation is decreasing. But it's an inflation quite lower also because no one is consuming in Argentina because it's everything extremely expensive.
Protests have been a near daily occurrence as the nation buckles under rising debt and inflation.
La gente está muy cansada de no llegar a fin de mes.
Workers are sick of struggling at the end of the month. The nation's debt is already on our shoulders. The government took out another loan in 2018 from the International Monetary Fund.
So what we have nowadays is it's like a socialization of the debt. Because, all Argentinians are going to pay the debt, but the beneficiaries of this debt is the financial elite of Argentina. Now it's even more clear than ever that IMF loans actually are completely politics. It's just political loans. And there is no sustainability in any of them.
Es cierto que yo no voy a estar aliado con los comunistas. Es cierto que rechazamos ser parte del BRICS. Ahora, es cierto que no considero que sea nuestro socio estratégico.
Most of the projects with China are halted nowadays. And then, it's way more complicated. So the dynamic, even the trade dynamics is not that sustainable.
Public outrage is growing after a series of audio recordings from a former government officials exposed a corruption scheme involving Javier Milei's sister, Karina, who allegedly received vast amounts of money from kickbacks from the sales from pharmaceutical companies to Argentina's disabled services.
In 2018, he was saying that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Caputo, he basically smoked the money of the IMF. Now he's the president, and he hired the same Caputo who smoked the money of the IMF to become Argentina, Minister of Economy. So the probability is that this time, the money is going to be outflow of the country. But this is like high-level corruption, so an Argentinian judiciary system never really questioned that.
I think the entire country understands what has held them back for decades now, and they're willing to take a certain amount of personal pain. Now we have to see how this transition goes.
Hi everyone, my guest today is a very well-respected intellectual, María José Sly. She's an Argentinian sociologist and a researcher specializing in international political economy, China, Latin America relations, and development finance. She's also a PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University in America. Her work examines how global power shifts, scientific cooperation, and debt dynamics shape Argentina's economy and geopolitical trajectory. She's also worked as a consultant at the Inter-American Development Bank. She wrote an insightful article in July this year titled Argentina's Debt Trap, and I strongly recommend people to read that article. She has also appeared on numerous platforms and shows discussing the topic of Argentina's financial troubles. So thank you for being here, Maria. Great to be talking to you. How are you?
Thank you, Ali, for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm very good.
That's good to know. So you're a doctor now, or are you becoming a doctor? Shall I call you Dr. Maria?
I'm a doctor. Applying for jobs. I'm in the job market. Yeah. So waiting for that. But almost ready with my PhD.
That's great. So what's your PhD topic on?
Well, I'm comparing Argentina and Brazil and their relation with China. So those countries are very similar in a couple of things. The level of industrialization is quite similar. The GDP per capita of both is kind of at the same level. But it's very interesting. And both countries in the last 20 years have this shift of having the US as the main trade partner to China became, more and more prominent in their economy. Also, both countries suffer, the pendulum, we call that in Latin America, from more progressive governments to, neoliberals. So, but the outcome of the cooperation with China is very different. Brazil even though, they came from, the Workers' Party to Bolsonaro, they never dropped the BRICS. Actually, the trade with China increased, even with right-wing governments. So it's very different. And in the case, all the projects with that China has in Brazil are done, operating. Whether in Argentina, the situation is way more complicated. So in Argentina, we have all these pendulums. Most of the projects with China are halted nowadays. And then, it's way more complicated. So the dynamic, even the trade dynamics is not that sustainable. Brazil has tremendous surplus with China. It's over $40 billion per year. Whether Argentina, we have negative, trade with China for, deficits. Near 10 billion per year. So it's very different, the dynamics, although the countries are quite similar. So I'm looking at the agribusiness sector, then the issue with hydro dams, and then all the issue with the swaps and the renminbi internationalization, and then the airspace case. So I'm comparing, both countries and trying to explain why, they have so different outcomes.
That's a fascinating area, because when I got interested in China, I wanted to find out how China has progressed so much so rapidly. I found a book, I think you must have read it, The New China Playbook by K.U. Jin. That was really informative. And that goes from the beginning of 1960s, 1950s, how China came through all that trouble initially, and then how they expanded their tech sector. Before that was agriculture sector, and how they are the tech leaders of EVs and renewables now. So I know you're short on time, so I'll be quick. So this new debt, $20 billion, do you know where it's going to be spent on? Is it going to be spent on infrastructure projects, or it's going to go to industries?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm going to quote Milei himself, the president of Argentina. In 2018, he was saying that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Caputo, he basically smoked the money of the IMF. Now he's the president, and he hired the same Caputo who smoked the money of the IMF to become Argentina, Minister of Economy. So the probabilities that this time, the money is going to be outflow of the country, or basically smoke, to tax havens, is very, very high. Moreover, Argentina nowadays, we have a cabinet full of former JP Morgan bankers. All of them quite, with a lot of expertise about, financial operations. And it's a highly revolving door. So probably, and this is nothing that I'm saying, is even in the, IMF reports, they mentioned, when they made evaluation of the previous loan that IMF gave to Argentina, that all this money, huge percentage of this loan was actually outflow of the country. So what we have nowadays is it's like a socialization of the debt, because all Argentinians are going to pay the debt, but the beneficiaries of this debt is the financial elite of Argentina.
So it's very like corruption. Corruption is rampant there, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned that in your article.
High-level corruption, so and Argentinian judiciary system never really questioned that. It's very interesting. There was he's like a professor in Argentina. He made the first case in the Argentinian justice against the debt, and actually the Argentinian justice system at the end of the day recognizes all these debt cycles. They were scandal. It was full of corruption. But they never really have the enforcement to go ahead. So basically they just send all these materials to the Congress and say to the Congress, well, next time you have to look for it. Better, to make better deals. And actually that's never solved the issue, because Argentina keeps, keeping this cycle, and it's actually the same people. Nowadays, for example, people that participated in the huge mega canje, which was a huge scandal as well in 2001, that led Argentina to, the largest crisis in the history of the country, was totally crashed. Well, the same people, some of them are back in the government. So it's basically the same people that repeats itself. It's like a déjà vu, same figures that are, coming and repeating the same story. So it's very harsh that the situation is going to be different. Of course, nowadays there is kind of like a pack, because I mean, Argentina didn't pay anything from the $45 billion. It was the largest loan on IMF history. In 2018, we didn't pay any dollar from that, but the IMF gave Argentina this year another 20 billion, and U.S. Treasury also gave another 20 billion. So we are talking about so far $85 billion only from these two creditors. So it's like now the situation is kind of not super controlled, but the macroeconomic is kind of stable. Argentina has a very overvalued peso, so it's a huge, problem, because the exporters cannot export. It's very cheap to import, and also like it's very, very expensive nowadays. But the problem is this is not sustainable. It's only sustainable by debt.
Yes. Why do you say that the Argentinian peso is overvalued?
Because we are in a moment like 1-to-1. It's very similar to the 90s. In the 90s, one Argentinian peso was valuing $1. But of course, our economy is not the US economy. So what happened was like a tremendous destruction of the industries of Argentina. So they expanded tremendously the import sector. So most of the companies like bankrupted. So we are in a similar pattern nowadays. Actually, the main beneficiary of all this overvaluing of the peso actually is China, because Chinese exports to Argentina has been increasing tremendously.
Sorry,
so
I was on
Argentinian
mute.
debt with China, trade deficit is increasing now.
Yeah. No, sorry, I was on mute. I was trying to say something. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, and that is very difficult for exporters, because, for example, you compete, your same products compete with Brazil, and Brazil, for example, agriculture sector, they don't pay any taxes. In Argentina, you have to pay a lot of taxes. And then you have a very overvalued peso, so that makes all your costs of production very high. So that's the current situation. So it's going to be challenging in the future. We really don't know where it's going to go, the situation.
I think you mentioned that in one of, I think in your article as well, this thing that the same people get recycled in the government. I think you mentioned someone, Federico Sturzenegger, or he's a minister of deregulation, and then Martin Memon, Chamber of Deputies president, something like that. So these were the same people who were there for the previous crisis, and then you say that these are the same people that Milei has brought into his government as well. So the question I have is, how does IMF keeps giving loan to Argentina, and despite being fully aware that it's the same people that are going to take loans and they're going to probably run away or not going to pay back, how does IMF have confidence in Argentina?
I think now it's even more clear than ever that IMF loans actually are completely politics. It's just political loans. And there is no sustainability in any of them. The ex post, evaluation of the IMF of the previous loans already had a lot of learnings from the IMF. And even though they repeat the same mistakes again with this $20 billion loan, So I don't think, we have to understand that, the IMF nowadays is a very important political tool. This is not economics, and then you can find all the, the data. We know how to do that, like to justify something that is actually unjustifiable. Nowadays, with $65 billion, Argentina has to repay, the repayment term is ridiculous. Until 2045, Argentina has to pay back the loans. And some of the payments are absolutely impossible in this Argentina situation. And there is also, it's like a toxic relationship, because also IMF benefits from this situation. We are actually, Argentinians are the most important financiers of the IMF bureaucracy, because we are, the main payers of interest rates and surcharges even. So that's how the system works, and it's very questionable. And to be frank, if you check in all the history of the IMF, there is not any single experience that actually was successful. There is not.
That's true.
So it's a
That's
big
true.
deal.
I agree with you. Yeah. I think that's because of the austerity measures that IMF and also World Bank puts on countries. So, so you mentioned in your article that IMF managing director Christina, she's sort of supporting Milei. So is there a previous friendship that the two had, or is it Trump trying to bring them together? Or I think the better question would be, why does Trump like Milei so much?
Well, I think, the bureaucracy of the IMF, they are bureaucrats. So they are, basically like the face, but the real decisions makers are, in the council in the politics, particularly in the US, which is the country that has the veto power. Milei is interesting because it's like Milei wants to be like Trump, but actually he's doing exactly the opposite that Trump is doing. At least Trump, he has a very protective policy. He wants to encourage industry, which is exactly the opposite as Milei is doing. Milei is super, opening borders. He's destroying the state. He's not interested in industry at all. So it's interesting because then we call that peripheral neoliberals, actually is very different than the current, you can say right-wing leadings, leaders nowadays in core countries. Even in Europe, if you check the rhetoric, economic rhetorics, is not actually, liberal. Whether in Argentina is extremely liberalism. But it's interesting because, they are super liberal, but at the end of the day, it's like the state behind, covering all this huge business and financial operations.
So China doesn't have any Belt and Road projects in Argentina, is that right? Or do they?
No, Argentina joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and we got a package of $20 billion, but none of these projects actually came out of project. Argentina used to have, before the Belt and Road Initiative, a couple of projects. One of them was the renewal of the railway system, which is very interesting. Argentina, and actually my ancestors, they were from the UK. They came to Argentina to build the railway hundreds of years ago. And then I was studying all the loans with the IMF, and the first loan signed with the IMF in 1858, one of the clauses basically was to destroy the Argentinian railway. And it was impressive because that's, that was the time that Argentina was really rich and successful. It was a huge extension of railways all over the country. And that actually was one of the main assets of development. And, when then they started destroying, it was impossible to compete for many, many regions in Argentina. So that was kind of it started the development of Argentina. So when China gave Argentina loans to renew a part of the railway, particularly to, it was very extractive like the UK was by then, but it was basically going to the main areas of the soybean production. So that facilitated, the trade with China. And then there is a couple of other projects. One of them, I just wrote a piece that I will be happy to share with you as well. It's about the hydro dam. This is the largest hydro dam that China is building outside China. It's a near $5 billion project. And after 10 years, it is only 30% concluded. And this is a big concern for China as well, because, they have been super successful, building here in China, Three Gorges and, many others, huge dams. The same with, building hydro dams all over the world. But in the case of Argentina, it's kind of a failure. And that's a very complex story, but I will be happy to share about that. But actually, one of the things that I'm pointing out is also the fact that Argentina is very indebted with the IMF. That was also an obstacle for the Chinese finance to move, forward in Argentina.
So now we see a BRICS bank coming up. So do you think Argentina would move to that side, join the BRICS in the future? Or will they stick with IMF and America?
Well, actually, Argentina was invited to join. Argentina sent all the papers in the paperwork to join, but then the government changed, and then Milei dropped the invitation. So that's the problem in Argentina. Is like, we have a very politicized foreign policy. So every government does whatever they want. So that's the pendulum. It's very complicated because there is no strategy. There is no, there is nothing. All the decisions are not connected to the real economic or national interests of Argentina. So in Milei administration, it's very harsh that they will, that will happen. But we don't know in the future, because if Peronism or the progressive, win the elections, they may move forward with the BRICS. What is very different, in the case of Brazil. Brazil, even though with Bolsonaro, they never questioned the BRICS. And so that was something very interesting. Even like Brazil has a director during Bolsonaro time in the BRICS bank. So that is very different about Argentina. I mean, Argentina is way more chaotic in that sense, even though China is the second trade partner. So you will expect, and Brazil is the first trade partner. So it's like two BRICS countries. And if you sum up India, it's like over 40% of Argentinian exports are going to BRICS country. But the ideology sometimes is way more important than even the trade interest in Argentina. It's very short term. Yeah.
So is Milei popular among people, or is he just a product of the political system?
He was very an outsider. In a way, I mean, he was connected to elites. He used to work for one of the billionaires of Argentina. He was on TV, being not popular, but really eccentric. So people, I mean, even bad about him. A lot of people talk about him because he was very eccentric. But he didn't have even a party, so he built a new party. But for winning elections, he made an alliance with Macri, which was also a right-wing president of Argentina. So that's why also the recycling part, the story came also from, this alliance, with them. But I would say the problem as well is the Peronist party. The last administration was a disaster. It was partially a disaster because they never really negotiated with the IMF. So, you are very restricted. You have to implement all these structural adjustment programs in a context with, you have the pandemic. Also, Argentina has a tremendous draw. So that was a huge complication of the macroeconomic situation. And they never really negotiated with the IMF. So basically the previous Minister of Finance, Martin Guzman, he was working with Stiglitz, but basically they legalized the loan because the previous one was a disaster. There was no even the minimum paperwork for asking a loan, but basically they asked for a new loan, legalizing this one, and then they didn't negotiate much. So at the end of the day, you have a very tremendous burden to the people, an inflationary cycle going on. Then Guzman, resigned, and then the Peronist Party choose the Ministry of Finance with over 200% inflation rate to be the candidate to the presidency. So people get, people got very bad about this situation. I mean, they didn't like the traditional right wing. They didn't like this option. So they went to the person that they didn't know at all. So they went to Milei. And with all this loan and this tremendous support by the US, now the inflation is decreasing. It's even though very high in comparison to other places in the world, but in comparison to previous Argentinian situation, the inflation is lower. But it's an inflation quite lower also because no one is consuming in Argentina because it's everything extremely expensive. And then inflation is very high, but the wages, they don't adjust with inflation rate. So you have this, this very complex situation. And then people that are, they have middle class or upper middle class, for them it's very cheap to travel. So Argentina is one of the main, emitters of tourism. So all this is an outflow of dollars. So yeah, the situation is very complex. But yeah, Trump was he was losing some support, and then Trump gave all this US Treasury swap to Milei, and he said to the people of Argentina, you have to vote for Milei, otherwise we are not going to support anymore. And people in Argentina are very tired. You can imagine it's living in a country that is in permanently financial crisis. So people say, okay, we are voting for Milei because we don't want to have another crisis. And they don't. They know. I mean, I'm very connected in Argentina as well. But we know. I mean, the Peronist doesn't have an agenda as well how to solve these problems. So we have been trying, I mean, to make connections and networks, trying to think some strategies, to solve the debt trap. And this is something that, I mean, at least a couple of intellectuals were trying to think about it and making, some connections, and even talking to some of the people there, in Washington and even in the IMF, because they know, I mean, the situation is very unsustainable. And when you're such a huge debtor, because Argentina nowadays responds for over 35% of the IMF funds. So the problem is now is not only for Argentina, this is also like a huge problem for the IMF, I mean, if you owe that much to a bank, then the bank is also like, has a complication with you. So
yeah, so
that's something actually that
bank is a hostage now, I guess. But do you think Argentina will take more loans in future from IMF without repaying this loan? Do you think it can happen?
Well, they gave 20 billion. I mean, we didn't pay the largest loan in the entire history of the IMF, 45 billion, and then they give another 20 billion. And I guess like the swap with the IMF, with the swap with the US Treasury came because the IMF couldn't give another 20 billion. Because of course, I mean, internally in the IMF, I'm sure there is like a lot of discontent, with this US push to continue support Argentina, because it's not sustainable, and they don't know. They really know that, So we don't know. I mean, they are saying that they are going to open to international creditors. Argentina has a very tremendous story about, all the vultures funds, all the negotiations with the hedge funds. There was a huge, huge problem in the past. So these people are financial guys, they came from JP Morgan, they know how to play the game. And for them, it's very convenient. I mean, they are extremely powerful and rich. The problem is like for the country, this is not sustainable. So yeah, I'm not sure what's going. I mean, no one really knows what's going to happen in the future. Yeah.
No, that's true. I think
but it doesn't seem positive.
yeah. I think what we can do is we can stay positive, especially the Argentinian people. But probably the best way to make money for outsiders is to bet against the Argentinian currency, because the debt denominated in United States dollars, or is it in Argentinian peso?
Well, in comparison to other Latin American countries, we have a very high percentage of US denominated debt. So, but it depends the bonds, because there are different like bonds. Some of them are in pesos with tremendous high interest rates. So sometimes they convert to pesos, then they had huge interest rates, and then they convert back to dollars, and then they outflow of the country. That basically was like most of the time the systemic. It's very interesting. Argentinian private sector, because all these operations, they are actually creditors to the world. So Argentinian private capital is a creditor to the world, but Argentinian public sector actually is a debtor to the world. So there is interesting things, because the IMF, if you really check all the documents of the IMF regulations, you can't ask a loan and then outflow of the country. So in a different context, the IMF actually could help the Argentinian government in order not only to prevent this to happen, but also like to condemn the people that use the loans to outflow of the country and make all these financial speculation operations. So we hope, at least like in the future, we can have this cooperation. Argentina also is like a FACTA agreement. I mean, join the FACTA agreement with the US. So most of the money actually goes back to US financial system or tax haven in the Caribbean. That's basically like the form. But all this information is there. So we expect that in the future, these people can really like have accountability, and
But I guess if the government or the administration is corrupt, there's very little people can do. I guess they can keep taking loans. What are some of the conditions of IMF when they give this $20 billion loan? Do you know?
Well, we never know exactly all the conditionalities, but nowadays they are pushing for a labor reform. They are pushing for a pension reform. Argentina, Milei administration closed a lot of the ministries, they are definancing all the industrial and the scientific sector of Argentina. So now we have a tremendous brain drain, like researchers in the aerospace, in the nuclear sector, they are leaving the country. So, I mean, it has tremendous very negative developmental implications. Because, it's like people, they're not getting even to the end of the month. So you have researchers like doing, Uber in order to get to the end of the month. So the situation is very bad. I mean, for a lot of people, particularly for, the people that are either in the informal sector or they are, employees in a way from the, to the government. Yeah.
So looking at the Argentinian economy, most of it is services, is that right? And then some of it is manufacturing or industry. That's the mix?
Yeah, I mean, it's like nowadays it's like a 20% is industry,
right?
And then you have a 30% like agriculture, and then the rest is like the third sector. Yeah.
So,
but of course, I mean, we are one of the countries that has. But this is not only Argentina. Most of the developing countries in the world, they are paying more now for debt services than for education, health systems. So this is something that we really have to rediscuss the financial system. And I think in the 80s, they tried to create like a debtor club. But of course, I mean, that was like kind of like the peak of the U.S. Hegemony, if you want to call that. But nowadays, I think we're in a transition, so there is more opportunities. With only 3 countries, like, for example, Ecuador, Pakistan, and Argentina, you are talking about over 50% of the IMF funds. So I think, there is a lot of place now to discuss these things and to make some alliances in order to rediscuss how the financial architecture now works. And we need a financial architecture that works for most of the people, not just like for few, former bankers. I mean, that's not sustainable, and this is not fair.
So is there any chance in future to befriend China again? Because what I've read about China's development help is that they actually like to build infrastructure, and they can issue bonds as well, or they can give you loan also at a very low interest rate. Or so that can pump up the economy also. So is there an opportunity in future, when you say that don't know what the next future government would or who in that government would be, but is there a possibility that Argentina could get close to China to save its economy?
Argentina is already Argentina, we didn't discuss that, but Argentina already is very close to China in a way that Argentina is one of the few countries that activated the swap, which is a central bank loan from the Chinese central banks to Argentina central bank. And actually, Argentina doesn't have reserves in the central bank. So what we have, I mean, net reserves are negative. And gross reserves, a big percentage of the gross reserves actually is the swap with China. So the swap with China responds for a huge share of the Argentinian gross reserves. What is very interesting is like China never really activated fully like the swap. So they activate, depending on the year, like 5 billion or 1.5 billion. So they actually, the swap with China has offered Argentinian economy a huge stability with all the problems, because if they gave the 20 billions, to Argentinian elites, the 20 billions are going to be gone. So it was very interesting, the system, because they gave 20 billion near 20 billion to Argentina, but only activated like, $1 to $5 billion. So that was like kind of like a core of Argentinian gross reserves for many, many, years. And today as well, even like Besson was all the time saying, I mean, this here, he went to Argentina in April and say that Argentina has to remove the swap with China. But now they say, no, we never mentioned that, because of course, I mean, first of all, it's a big part of Argentinian gross reserves. And second, China is also like a lender of the US. So they still have, over $7 billion of US Treasury bonds.